Just a few housekeeping things, and now I'm going to turn it over to Lola Fennell to introduce our keynote speaker.
Yeah, perfect. Can you?
All right. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Adrian Stanger, who is the Cybersecurity Director at Senior Cryptographic Authority at NSA. Dr. Stanger works to prevent attacks with a focus on cryptography. He endured his PhD in mathematics from UC Santa Barbara and a BA in math from Weber State University.
Seems to work.
Dr. Stanger has worked within the Cybersecurity Directorate for his 20-plus year career at NSA. He has been involved in notable cryptographic efforts and involved in cryptographic strategies for over a decade. Partnering with NIST, GCHQ, CSE, and NATO, he will now talk about cybersecurity. Dr. Stanger, everyone.
Thank you for that. Got to hold it close. All right. All right. Can you hear me? Okay. I just have to speak really close. Okay. I can make that work. Thanks for being here on a bright, early Sunday morning. Sure, nobody would ever think of anything better to do than come and listen to me. So let me just start off by saying thanks for the invitation, first of all, to come out here, Roberta. And thanks for the introduction and also the context. It was a good reminder again, we just had the announcement of the final standards from NIST, and that kind of helps set the context here. So I'm not here to say anything very revolutionary, I think. I hope. We'll see what people think. I'm not here to, some big vision of how we can have secret key take over the internet or anything like that. Not even here with necessarily particular challenges, but certainly some questions that I think would be good for the community to address. Again, despite how one of the slides later may look, not looking to re-architect the internet, but trying to push in terms of our knowledge of where do we absolutely need to have public key, where can we manage with just secret key, symmetric key. So think of this as kind of the big question here is, what could we do without public key? Obviously, in cybersecurity, it's always about trade-offs, right? So you're going to have to think about what kinds of security maybe you lose, right? Maybe you lose some notions of security. You trade them off for maybe better performance or a better budget. Barring that, so it seems clear that we can't do everything with symmetric key. I think that's pretty clear. But maybe we could think about what's kind of the minimal use of public key under various models. Okay. And last of all, I should say this is not going to be the most technical talk. It's certainly not a lot of technical details. More questions than anything else. I did want to, again, provide some context here. So I will start by providing some updates on things that we have said publicly and that we are about to say more about publicly. There we go. All right. All right, so CNSA 2.0, we announced this when NIST announced their finalists in 2022. We pretty quickly followed up with announcing our selections, what would be in the Commercial National Security Algorithm Suite 2.0. And we have made some updates along the way. So we made an update in February. We have an update coming that I'll talk about. So yeah, I forgot to change the slides to put the new names that NIST has, but I kind of like the old ones. So That's just my personal preference. But again, for most of you, this probably isn't new. We have signatures for software and firmware updates. They're based on the hash-based signatures that NIST standardized in 2021, I believe, if I remember right. With the symmetric key, we're sticking with what we said we would do before, AES 256, SHA 384. We did back in 2022 say we would allow SHA 512. Of course, that's more secure and sometimes it's even preferred by developers, so that's perfectly fine. The only reason we didn't publicly allow it before was because of interoperability concerns. That's always we find that to be a big issue with the big enterprise that we work with in the national security domain. So what did we update in February? We made it clear that crystals dilithium could also be used for software and firmware signing. There are use cases where clearly that's what makes sense rather than using hash-based signatures. We had been considering how to specify when we would allow it, but we decided it was just in the best interest to just allow it, period, rather than trying to split hairs on when it'd be allowed or not. And then the latest update on that is we are allowing SHA-3 for things like internal, boot up checks and things like that, where it doesn't present an interoperability issue. We don't have any we don't have a security concern with SHA-3 per se, but because of a lot of deployed equipment, because of the huge deployed equipment base, transitioning to SHA-3 is a problem for typical protocols for us, at least for the foreseeable future. So will there come a time when we allow SHA-3? I assume that will be the case at some point, assuming that, as it looks like SHA-3 kind of takes over the world going forward, but currently we don't have any plans for that. We're on kind of a wait and see basis. All right. We've updated the FAQs along with this as well. One of the things, because there's some confusion sometimes, we really wanted to highlight our guidance really is for national security system customers. We know that other people look at it and, consider it, but really when we're putting out that guidance, we are aiming for our national security customers and people who are developing for them. Okay, so sometimes that may explain why things look a little different that we push than others. It's because we have a very specific clientele. Let's see, I did mention SHA-3 again for boot up. As far as hybrids, we're trying to get the message right. We have the confidence in quantum resistant algorithms, number one, so that we don't prefer, require, endorse hybrids for national security systems. Now, we understand that others want them. We know that to interoperate with some of our partners, we'll have to have them. We know that some of the standards may require us to have them, although we're trying to get options because we really think that not only our national security customers, but we think others would also benefit from having pure quantum resistant choices. But we are not trying to force that on anybody. Just to be clear, we just want to have that option available. And I think that that'll also be good because eventually at some point, people are going to want to transition away from hybrids. I don't know when, 10 years, 20 years, whatever that time frame is. And I think it'll be best if that option's already available. I guess one of the concerns I have is I worry, speaking of hybrid, that we're delaying on standardizing quantum resistant signatures in part because we're trying to figure out how to hybridize. And again, for our part, we would just like there to be the quantum resistant solutions, and we're ready to roll with that once those are standardized. Yeah, so I think that's it. So again, all of this just to say that most of the effort as we move forward is about quantum resistant cryptography. We're not suddenly trying to change gears and say everybody in the world should focus on symmetric key, something like that. But we do feel that there's a case, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Just to reiterate, I think people have seen this, but we're not big fans of QKD. We put a white paper out years ago on why we're not. I think the thing that I'll just highlight here is, I think the thing that often isn't appreciated is how fragile of a communications system this is. Availability seems like it's a really significant concern, especially when you're talking about contested areas like in war. So what I do think is, I think that there is a time frame, and again, I'm not going to try and prognosticate here in public when that is, but someday, soon, for some definition of soon, I think entanglement as a service will be an important feature to have. It'll be useful and beneficial. So I think it's important to continue that research. But I don't think the time for QKD is now, at least not for national security systems. Might there be other use cases? Maybe. That's not where my authority to speak really lies. The bumper sticker I usually give on this, and maybe it's not quite the right thing, but I think it's at least pretty close, is classical protection for classical data, quantum protection for quantum data. I think that's what's going to make sense. All right. So, of course, the other way you can get quantum resistance is by using symmetric key cryptography. So what about those options? All right, well, there are caveats, right? So again, nothing really revolutionary here. They're generally cumbersome. Now, we'll talk about, of course, they do have some benefits why people would want to use them, but let's talk about the headaches first. Somehow you have to get those keys around, so you have to have couriers. That's not the most timely way to do things, flying people around with keys and bags and things like that. Not very agile. Or you have to have layers of keys, and that kind of turns into turtles all the way down type of problem. How many layers are enough? Who knows? Ad hoc networking, right? So things like e-commerce, where you just have to trust somebody on the fly, or you're making these trust relationships on the fly. That seems at least difficult, if not, well, impossible, maybe little strong, but certainly difficult to make work. Okay, so maybe if we assume, okay, let's assume I can't do e-commerce with pure symmetric key. Could we at least minimize it? Could you, for instance, and I'm just throwing something out there, could you just do one-time public key and go then on? Yeah, there's probably a way. Well, what are the security trade-offs? What threats do you, or what additional risks do you accept if you only do kind of minimal public key? Or one way you could resolve things is you have some trusted third-party partner that's involved. How can you minimize that? What are the trade-offs you get there? What are the assumptions that you need to have? Right? Everybody has some kind of hardware token with them just about all the time anymore, it seems like. At least one, a phone or something. All right, phone hardware tokens, maybe a little iffy, but how can we use those? Can we use those better, right? We have hardware tools. We have a lot of research and new modes, new thoughts of security models, right? Are there ways that we can combine these to maybe do something we had thought not possible before? That's really the question here. Okay, and then one other caveat, often, of course, if you're using symmetric key, you're using it for both confidentiality and authentication. That's usually not considered best practice, but we do know that there are ways to kind of make those keys independent as well. So doesn't have to be the way that case. All right, so what are some of the positives, or where might we want to use symmetric keys? Again, nothing here I think is shocking. There are some niche use cases where it can work well. So when you have constrained devices, maybe public key is either too hard or too costly to be very useful, or maybe you have a small static network. So we're talking about ad hoc networking and things where things are more dynamic. Of course, it really seems like you need public key or something similar to public key at least to really make that happen. But if it's small, it's static, maybe that's easier to manage for a network owner to use symmetric keys than to build up a full PKI, right? Those are not always easy to do. Or if you're looking for extremely high performance, and again, when we talk about constraints, there could be lots of ways that those could be constrained. Now, if you're talking about using, pure symmetric key, that often doesn't fit in ideal notions of zero trust. So again, there's some trade-offs anytime you do that. But there are ways that you can at least get key freshness in, I think. Now, for us, so that's one use case, kind of these niche use cases. Another that has been prominent for us is to either as an extra layer of security for quantum to provide quantum resistance, or as an interim solution. So we've provided guidance for our commercial solutions for classified customers to, if they had data with long intelligence life, that they could start using symmetric key cryptography back in 2016, if I remember right. So again, there are places that make sense. There weren't, obviously there weren't quantum resistant algorithms standardized at that time. So it was a comparatively quick and easy way to change if they had data that they needed to protect at that time. And lastly, I'll just say that there are some ways that you can do kind of ad hoc-ish access control here with the symmetric key. So maybe you have a small group and you want to maybe you have like different groups that form on, I don't know, some periodic basis, daily or weekly. And sometimes the easiest thing to do is be able to just share a symmetric key for that brief period of time to communicate. Okay. So let's just assume for the moment that we agree that there are spaces where symmetric key is a viable solution for managing the whole network. We need to have some ways of managing that key. We need to be able to have some standards. Of course, it's not enough just to agree upon the algorithms. We need to agree on data formats, all the 9 yards to be able to make those things interoperate. Of course, we really want, be able to take a product from entity A and product from entity B, and they should be able to work together, hopefully. I know that's a little idealistic. That's not how it always works, but that's what we would like ideally to get out of our standards. We probably need, of course, not just a standard, but standards in many situations to cover all the different use cases. NSA, again, we use commercial standards for CSFC. And of course, we have other commercial uses for cryptography. So I said it has been a while here. So I was trying to think of when we had standardized a fully symmetric key entire system. And Kerberos was the thing that came to mind, but it is, as Roberta said, there certainly have been symmetric key portions proliferating in various standards at IETF, right? Because it is recognized that we need to have this. So for instance, we're seeing pre-shared keys. There are options in TLS and IPsec. I believe those are done, or at least done for now. Always possibility to come back and refine those. I think that there are already options, at least certainly in IPsec, there are at least drafts. I haven't checked on this recently for ways you can use symmetric key and other keys together, right? With the, I think it's the multiple key draft, if I remember right. And I think that there's still a lot of research needed on when we can do symmetric key only schemes and when that makes sense. And I'm sure you all have even more ideas than I do. All right. So I'm just going to close here with some questions that I think. All right. There's that first question. And again, I am not really trying to re-architect the internet to go symmetric key. What I am trying to do with the first question is just try and push, or ask you to push, how close could we get to a symmetric key internet? How much would we have to sacrifice? Again, there's going to be some trade-offs. Barring that, because I don't think you could really go do a full symmetric key internet that everybody would be happy with. What's the minimal public key that you could, and again, loosely say, feel happy with? And again, what I really mean by that is, you know, think about different security models and assumptions and analyze what you can get there. What if we had a universal trusted third party? Pretend we can all agree on one. I'm sure, you know, the US, Russia, China, and, you know, whatever other countries you name, no problem, right? Okay, again, this is just, you know, ideally, just trying to think academically about what is the art of the possible here. Okay, all right, so that's one line in research. What could possibly be done? Are there ways to kind of quantify, maybe quantify isn't the right word, but to, you know, could you get to a point of kind of having like a decision tree, say, to figure out, okay, I'm building this system. When do I need public key? When do I need symmetric key? What makes sense? And always that's going to be a tricky problem to formalize, I think, just because what makes sense will be different depending on who you are. Some people, what makes sense is what costs the least. Obviously, for a lot of us, it'll be what gets you the most security for your buck, which is slightly different. So for instance, if we're looking at constrained systems, well, what constraints? Under which constraints would it make sense? Is it a bandwidth constraint? Maybe that makes more sense for symmetric key, budget, latency, other characteristics. I think that these things can be explored. Obviously, again, security model impacts, there are trade-offs again. Again, what requirements? What can we prove cannot be done with pure symmetric key? And by extension, you know, throw in some kind of minimal public key. What can I not do with, you know, formalize what that is? I don't know, one key exchange or whatever. What can I prove that I cannot get with that? All of that. And then are there any novel system properties? We've had new modes being discussed. Are there some hidden novel system properties that we can develop by creating systems based on these symmetric key schemes with some of these novel new modes? And of course, always can throw in mixing with light public key right? So in short, I think that there are a lot of questions to answer here. I'm going to conclude here by just saying, I think that there's a lot of need for standardization still in this space. And I think that there's a lot of research that can be done to just kind of really get more clarity on when symmetric key, when public key, what really is kind of that dividing line. And I'll leave it at that. And thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Questions?
I had 3 questions, please. What's CSFC?
Oh, CSFC, sorry. Yeah, that's a commercial solutions for classified.
Oh, thank
So
you.
that, yeah, it's an NSA program we have where we take commercial products, usually in 2 layers, and use that for classified, protecting classified data.
Thank you. So you said that the 2.0 standards were going to all soon include SHA-3 for internal hardware functions. Does that include like embedded systems where I'm not really communicating with outside, but I might have software updates, for example?
To be honest, we hadn't thought about it quite that way. Probably okay. The big question there really comes down to, is it interoperating with something else?
Right.
I think that's really because again, for us, it's an interoperability question.
Right. And if it's not, then is your language in the is it an updated 2.0 standard? Or is that what you're looking at?
Yeah, it'll come out in probably right now, it looks like we'll have an update to our FAQs first. So this will be the 3rd FAQ we put out since we put out CNSA 2.0. And then the formal CNSS P15 should also have language in it.
And when might you expect that understanding? I'm not
Yeah.
asking you to commit, but
Yeah, that one goes through a lot more administrative process. I'm hoping this fall.
Okay.
I think we have the right people behind trying to get that sped up, that we should have it this fall, but it's the government.
right. Understood. Okay. And the last question, so I can see, I'm not an expert at this, but I can see how you could use, say, Kybers with certificate for your public keys and for long-term secret,
Mhm.
right? But for forward secrecy, wouldn't you want like a short-term session key that, I don't know how you would do that with symmetric systems.
I agree. I think in my mind, it seems like you need some kind of freshness coming in. Yep. But I can't say I haven't sat down to prove that it can't happen, but it seems like that's needed.
So do
Yeah.
you see a path or just using symmetric keys to achieve that? Or was that going to be?
No, I don't see a path for it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
But at one time, if you'd asked me, I wouldn't have said you could compute on encrypted data either. So
Okay. Thank you.
not quite the same question, of course, but
Other questions?
Hello, thank you. So I have to take the opportunity to ask about FIPS 205, SLH DSA Sphinx Plus. So so some applications would like to use that for instead of other hash-based signatures because of key management issues. It's already it's used by OpenTitan and Google in devices. So any take on that?
yeah, I'm aware of the concern. We've heard from industry on that, but so our reason why we chose the hash-based signatures in the first place is just because they're already standardized. That's really, we were trying to get things moving fast. So otherwise, at this point, we don't foresee adding SLH to the list of approved CNSA 2.0.
I see. All right, thanks.
algorithms. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Adrian. Really liked how you frame things, not trying to replace public key cryptography and so on, and these important other things we need to do. There was just one thing you said, I'm wondering if you could clarify a bit in terms of one use case being as an interim measure. So if I understand correctly, it's like we use ECC or RSA now, we'll use symmetric key methods for a while, and then when we're emotionally or otherwise ready, we'll migrate to post-quantum. Is that what you meant? And then are you worried about no one will want to migrate back to public key after that?
No, really. So we had given guidance back in 2016, I believe, to go ahead and use symmetric key at that time. So I think it made sense then. I'm not so sure that it makes sense now, but I could see it making sense for somebody who's dealing with acquisition cycles where maybe they're not going to purchase equipment that can do quantum resistant cryptography for 2 or 3 years out, but they might be able to flip a switch and add symmetric layer right now, right? So you might have a VPN where you could just turn it on, for instance. But yeah, other than that, I certainly wouldn't say, go out and purchase something now and flip on and do symmetric key now, because we have quantum resistant standards. Now that we have the standards, yeah, definitely if you're buying something new, definitely get something quantum resistant now. If you can do a software update to quantum resistant, do that. But if you have, say, an older device and you're not refreshing, yeah, by all means, go ahead and use symmetric cryptography now. Right. So it's kind of like the third option, I guess, on the menu.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
right.
So great.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Other questions? Adrian, let me ask maybe sort of a couple of questions here together. Earlier this year, I think your research director was talking about a possible black swan event and, doomsday sort of scenarios. And then, listening to your comments about hybrids and not wanting to go down that path. I'm just a little curious if you could speak to you mentioned the digital signatures that were standardized in 2021. I think we still don't have protection profiles to have, FIPS approved equipment. So so there's this timeline, and I'm curious about, thinking about backup plans and maybe you could just comment a little bit, like, as probably some of us sit here with with data that we're concerned about today. How do we balance that with the timeline and the sort of what ifs? And maybe you could make some comments there.
Yeah. So for a lot of national security customers, we've definitely encouraged them to, right? Like I said, back in 2016, we're telling them we're not going to have standards for a while. Go ahead and turn on symmetric cryptography now as an added protection. And I still think that that's, like I say, a reasonable way to go if you're not purchasing tomorrow with, one of the first few NIST validated things. It's funny, I was talking to Matt Scholl from NIST noon that day. They had their first 5 CAVP certs out. So last Tuesday. So somebody jumped on the bandwagon real fast there. Let me see. I got myself sidetracked there for a second. I think that there's definitely a role for symmetric key and quantum resistant protection. Again, for the most part, we hope our customers already rolled that. Unfortunately, that's probably more hope than true, but certainly we certainly know those who kind of were paying attention certainly rolled that. I think that if you're really concerned, so I know a lot of people talk about hybridizing, elliptic curve with a chem, quantum resistant chem, for instance. Like I said, we believe in the quantum resistant algorithms, but if I were going to hybridize, if I really wanted something, just in case, then I think that I would use a symmetric key. And right, because if I'm already thinking about, well, what if, I think I have a lot more confidence in symmetric key that there's not something, right? We know public key has structure, which, right, there's always a possibility, right? So if I were going to hybridize, I would probably do symmetric key. And the other reason I say that is when the quantum computer comes, I at least believe that the symmetric key is still quantum resistant, whereas an elliptic curve, it's just basically wasted space, which I don't know. I don't have good feelings with just random, things showing up in my protocols. So.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, thank you for your talk. I love this last slide with these research questions. And I'm also just going to ask a question I probably know the answer to, but do you foresee any, how does this research get done? Are we looking to academia? Do you think there would be sponsored research? Is this something DARPA is interested in?
I could try and get DARPA interested. We'll see if I have
Okay.
any luck. I wouldn't count on it, but yeah, I'm looking at academia with these questions. I hope they're intriguing enough that people want to solve them. I figure, one of the prerequisites for being in cybersecurity is you've got to be a masochist. So, take your best shot.
Okay, if there's,
One
go
more.
ahead.
Yeah.
Maybe a follow-up question. So many years ago, maybe like 14 years ago, I met somebody here from NSA, and they said that they basically
All right.
sponsor
I'm back.
all areas of science like chemistry, physics, except for cryptography,
Wow.
because I guess NSA
Very
believes they
nice.
have better expertise
So,
in
hello
cryptography.
everybody, I'm
So
Matthias
maybe kind
Gerlach,
of as a
and
follow-up to
this
the
is
last question.
End of
So if you
Wire.
have some of those
It's,
ideas, is there any
platform
chance like
with
NSA
Ken
could potentially
Huang
sponsor
and
some of
their
this research?
developers,
And if yes, what
carried
would
out
be
at
the way to go?
ETH
To pitch
week.
it to you? Or,
So,
So
will be about
let me
two
put it
main
this way.
components.
I
One is
don't see
composition
NSA
between
probably putting
various
out any
components of
grants.
secure messaging. We all know in this
There
world
are
that
some
secure
opportunities. I
messaging,
know
you need some
NSA
sort
gets
of
involved
key
with
exchange,
academia and
then some sort of message
kind of
channel.
more like
Is that
it's
it,
more like
or are there more components in this recipe for
researchers
secure
in
messaging?
math or
And
cryptography.
then I want
kind of
to
mentoring
emphasize
students.
this
I could
component
see that being a
analysis
possibility for
to
some of these. Certainly,
our
these are
security
questions
analysis
that,
of wire secure
don't seem like they
messaging
would be
application.
classified in some way.
But
So
first, let's take
I could see
step
something
back
like that. I don't
and
see
look at
NSA
the
doing
main
grants or
security
anything.
goal that we want from secure messaging, that is end-to-end security.
That's a good question.
So if you look for end-to-end security,
We could talk to that research
you will
director
find that
and see what he
something
says.
related to only the endpoints having access to the plain text.
Anything else from anyone?
In this case, if we have our traditional endpoints.
All right, well,
Alice
thank you,
bot
Adrian. Let's thank our
to people,
speaker.
we would ideally want
Thank you again.
Alice bot to have access to